Well, everyone, welcome back to Crossing the Line podcast with myself, Oliver Rednall, and Mr. Charlie Collicutt here.
Hello.
Partner in crime. And today we're very lucky to have Mr. Joel Devlin, cinematographer, with us. He has worked on many projects, including Born to Kill, Frankenstein Chronicles, more recently the ABC Murders, and his Dark Materials. He's been nominated for an Emmy and Royal Television Society Award. Is that right, Joel?
Yes, thankfully I won one of them.
Oh, well, there we go then. We're all good. I haven't missed anything out there or anything.
No, not yet. No, that is about as far as the accolades go, sadly. Well, it's not about the awards.
No, absolutely. So
that was for Broken that you won, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And that's part of the Royal Television Society.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's about, so that was the Royal Television. I mean, that was a nice surprise, not expecting that.
And is that something that you're like a member of, or
no? It's just a body that
Sure.
just one of those awards bodies that are around and recognise achievements in television, particularly the sort of craft industry achievements, which are really nice. Because I think most people are familiar with the more glittery award ceremonies, which tend to recognise people in front of camera. So it's nice to have something that recognises behind camera. And obviously with the RTS, they do a lot of focus on television, right across the spectrum, not just the world of drama that I inhabit, but everything else as well.
Is cinematography something you could see as when you were very young, you were interested in, like photography, or you were really interested in film?
I was a film nut as a kid, absolutely. Sworn up, member of the Star Wars generation. I was just at the right age when, I was about 6 when the first one came out, and then obviously subsequently, the other two came out as I grew up. So that was for me, I'm not saying it's all down to Star Wars, but it was like, that's my sort of very early memory of sort of absolutely falling in love with cinema. But I went down the route of photography, first of all, and was really pushing into documentaries more. And certainly as a camera assistant and even as a young operator, I was working in a documentary world, initially. And I think as much to do with the fact that was just a world I could get a foothold into pretty quickly. A lot of this, when you have the benefit of a few years to sort of look back in hindsight, you realize it's not so much planned as it's a series of circumstances that happen to you, and that's just the path you take. And I think with cinematography in particular, it's quite a broad range of backgrounds within cinematographers. I think you can look at a lot of other roles within, the world of film and drama and find that there's a fairly sort of linear route. But with cinematography, it seems to attract people from a much sort of broader range. And I wouldn't say there's any one path to become a cinematographer. It's just the path you happen to be led down that, leads you, gets you to that point. And mine was through photography and documentaries.
So you didn't go to film school or anything? You'd got a job as an assistant, or?
I had a sort of a more, no, I sort of did a bit of both, actually. So I wouldn't say I overachieved in my A-levels, so then when, so was pushed into a more vocational path in terms of studying at that level of education. And that's where I came across photography. I'd always been interested in art as a kid. That was always my sort of top subjects, really. So, and that kind of then just sort of naturally moved into photography as an art form. And that was purely because I screwed up my A-level results, needed to get other qualifications to get into university at the time. That's where I thought I was going. And that's where I kind of came across photography and film and all these other disciplines, which was like, oh, this is fantastic. And it took me down a whole different path. I did eventually go to film school. I went to the Newport School of Art, as it was then known, and who were at the time sort of specialised in documentary filmmaking. So for me, it was like, yes, this is it. This is the one I wanted. So
how was documentary going into that first before more of a fiction narrative? How has that influenced your work as it is now?
It's a good question. Interestingly, I always thought I wanted to shoot movies, films, I found the first time and this is a roundabout way of answering your question, so I'll hold on in there. But the first time I stepped on a TV drama set, the first TV drama I ever did, and I'd shot about 2 or 3 feature films before then, albeit low budget ones that no one's ever heard of. And I did, the first time I stepped on a TV drama set, I was instantly felt like I belong. Like, people talk about a sense of flow. That was an immediate sense of flow for me. That I'd never been on a set like that before, but the moment I was there as the DP, it was like, yeah, this is my environment. I belong. And I think what the documentaries did to allow me to sort of hit that moment was, in documentaries, you're thinking on your feet all the time. Like, you have to just react to what's around you, and you have to react quickly. You don't have time to, faff around or think, where's the best thing? You developed a very quick instinct of the best angle, where the nice light is, and you're thinking about story, and in documentaries, when you're a documentary cameraman, you're actually thinking as an editor more almost than you're thinking as a cameraman, in that you're thinking about, right, this shot could join up with this shot to that shot, and that will create a sequence that will tell a story that you're trying to tell, whatever it might be. All of that absolutely plays into a strength on a drama set, particularly the modern day TV drama. They're bigger, they're more ambitious than anything we've seen before, but they have the same constraints when it comes to time and budget. So you don't have the luxury of, say, you would have on some feature films where you can take a long time setting up. Often you're having to be quite reactive, to a situation, to serendipity, the greatest friend of any DP. And you just have to, you have to be quick and think on your feet. And documentaries absolutely were a great training ground for that, without doubt.
I think that, so the documentary experience you had basically gave you that background to work in a fictional narrative far easier, because you then didn't have the time restrictions of that thing is there now, we need to find the best way of filming it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would, yes, absolutely. That, and obviously what the lovely thing about drama is that you do have just that little bit more time than you would have in a documentary. So I think the only thing in documentaries you ever spend any time over is interviews, which is another thing because you get used to lighting people's faces. So that's quite, and often in many, many different environments, all over the world. So you get used to all these things. That all plays into it. Knowing the way, without sounding hideously pretentious, knowing the way that light works in different parts of the world also just plays into, observing, because often in documentaries you don't have control necessarily over the light. It's more often than not, it's available, whatever's around, particularly stuff that I used to do. And so, or you're making use of a bit of a bounce, and something, nothing more than that, or a lamp, because you just don't have the ability to cart all that, great big lighting kit around with you. And so you do become, whether you're aware of it or not, a sort of study of the way light works out in the world, the real world. So, and that, it all goes into your subconscious and informs you at some point. And I've definitely lent on moments I've remembered and then turned to my gaffer, Ben, who I now work with regularly, going, oh yeah, I remember this time I was like, and he's like rolling his eyes. But I mean, but it's like, yeah, that's the kind of light I think would work well here. So you have those little sort of moments that, again, just feed back. It all comes from that experience. I think at the time I remember feeling frustrated being in documentaries because I knew it, I'd made my mind up. I know where I want to go. And you being typical of anybody, you just want to get there. You think, oh, time's running out. I just want to get there. I want to be that, want to working in that area, dramas, to, film, whatever. I'm so glad that it panned out the way it did, that I was almost forced into taking the time that I had to take in, other disciplines, because I now know it made me more ready to tackle the world of TV drama. And I may well have not been able to do that, or been out of my depth, or not had the experience to bring, not that, and I'm still learning absolutely job by job, if I hadn't sort of, had those years.
Talking about light and things like that, when you choose a location or an area you're going to film, do you go there first and then you'll plan the shots perhaps before, say you're filming in some fields or at a farm or something? Will you go there weeks before the filming starts, or do you have that luxury or that time? So you can say, like, oh, the sun at this time, maybe, at this point. I know they have apps these days on phones that you can say, I'll be there on the 25th of May and the sun will be at this point of the day.
Oh yeah, we capitalize on all of the, all this modern technology. It's really useful. But yeah, so the general process in the world, drama is that we would, so I have a relatively extended prep period. The first part of that prep, say it's like, so the project I'm about to do, I'm going to be prepping it for 6 weeks. So the first couple of weeks, this side of Christmas, will be wholly spent going to see locations with the director and a location manager, who is effectively his or her job is to find suitable locations to a brief, that brief being the script. There'll be 2 or 3 choices per each location. And the director and I, along with him and a production designer, will whittle that down to the perfect one, that really suits the script. So we will spend a good fortnight, often longer, a month, looking at locations. And during that time, all these things are happening. When it's the location you want, the things you're taking into account, if it's an exterior location, is where is the sun going to be at the time of the year we're hoping to shoot it, times of day, and all this gets fed into the machine of when the most ideal time is to be in that location shooting. If we want a sort of 3/4 backlit scene and the sun's in that direction in the morning, then obviously you're sort of feeding that to the first AD who's in charge of scheduling to say, we should be here between the hours of 8 and 12 to optimize this location. And so it's all of that is definitely absolutely being fed into it. Yeah.
That's pretty intense, because people don't realize, this is one of the things we wanted to get a DOP on here to talk about, was, you watch a scene and it might only last a couple of minutes, but the effort and the weeks and weeks and weeks of prep, just talking about lighting, for example, that goes into just creating that shot that will obviously set the mood, the tone of the show, and effectively the whole storytelling process.
No, absolutely. And I mean, and I'm probably maybe sort of 3rd or 4th in line in terms of priority of a location. I think maybe if it's just simply you're rocking up at a location because visually it ticks all the boxes and what you want, then perhaps that is a conversation that is down to the director and I to decide, okay, yes, this is the perfect one. But if it's a location that then has to be manipulated to sort of fit the bill of the script, like a walk-in interior that the design team is then going to go in there and completely change, then it will be the production designer who will ultimately get the choice, whether that works. And then I can sort of throw in my 10 pence worth and say, yeah, this is great, or hang on a minute, this is 5 floors up and it's going to cost a fortune for us to light it, or whatever it might be. So, there are a lot of people who will, be saying, well, the location manager will have his eye on whether he can facilitate a location, which means can that location really take 150 crew turning up, and where do we park all the trucks that come with us, and all these sort of like ancillary things that are this machine in the background of that finished image. All of that has to be taken into account and sorted out long before we turn up at a location. So it's the months leading in prep is what is that's all about.
Yeah.
So how long before you say you're going to spend about 6 weeks or so prepping before you shoot something? Is that generally how long it would take, or is it very much dependent on the projects? Are some much longer or some shorter?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's dependent on the money and how much producers are willing to pay for somebody to be sort of effectively sat at a desk prepping. But I mean, I would say, so the job I'm about to do is a sort of 6-month job. We have the first block of scripts, which is the first 4 scripts of an 8 episode series. So I will effectively prep the first 4 episodes now with that first block director. So I would say you should assign 2 weeks per script. That would be my personal choice. I think that's a sort of a nice way of equating prep. Not that you spend every fortnight working on an individual episode, but if you're doing 4 episodes and you're prepping for that, I think you need 8 weeks generally. And I'll probably make up that time in my own time, where I can, because the time to read scripts, break them down. Every head of department, which obviously I am the head of the camera department, has to sort of look at the script and break it down into his or her needs, and what the script requires of them, so. And for me, it'd be times a day of the story's taking place, what the light is, how the camera's going to move, what is the story we're going to try, how do we tell the story with camera movement and all things like this, and so on and so forth. So yeah, a lot of that, it's also getting into the director's head. I mean, I've worked with the director I'm about to work with before, so I have a good idea of how she works, and that's great. In fact, we only worked together earlier this year, so it's been a very recent experience. I've just finished a project working with a brand new director who's Finnish. So, there's a sort of, like most Finns, he can speak 6 languages excellently, and I can only speak English. So, but thankfully, there was no language barrier, but, it's like, but there is a cultural sort of difference there, and he looks at things differently. And so a lot of time was spent just getting into his head. And so we had a longer period of time, but thanks to the one good thing that came out of the virus and lockdown is that we were able to spend a lot of time like this on Zoom, page turning scripts, and just I'm there soaking up what he thinks and how he's thinking, because we all might read a script and visualize it in a very different way. So my job during prep is to understand how the director sees it, and then where necessary or possible, also inject my own thoughts and feelings into it as well. And when you partnership with directors and you start working with them regularly, you get that lovely symbiosis, just happens quite naturally,
Sure. And when directors, like actors, they get almost a casting type thought of them. As a cinematographer, do you have that about you? Like for a certain job, where they be like, oh, so-and-so would be good for this, or so-and-so would be good for that. Do you have a sort of style that you're now known for that you might get chosen over someone else?
Well, I don't know, because I guess I've never partied to those conversations.
Yeah.
So I don't really know. I mean, interesting to go back to the documentary, how it influenced question. One of the things that I am perhaps known for is I do a lot of handheld work, because, from 10, 12 years of shooting documentaries, majority of it's on your shoulder, handheld. So you acquire a good sense of balance and skill with handheld camera work. And so I have definitely got jobs on the strength of my handheld camera work before, but I would hope that as the years go by, I'm able to slightly sort of enlarge the quiver of things that I can bring to the job, So,
it's fascinating that you mentioned the handheld camera work, because when watching something like the ABC Murders, there were times where we would notice that you could see kind of the wobble of moving, as like they're moving down the train carriage or something.
Yeah, that's it.
What in your mind, how do you decide between doing something in the handheld or doing it on rails or on a crane or something like that? Is it simply due to do with space or the feel that you're trying to get across with people?
It's a great question, and it's probably both of those things that you've mentioned are relevant. So yes, space and time sometimes, it's, but I think I try and be a little bit more, there's more logical about why use handheld. I think sometimes it's very easy to go handheld because it's quick and it's reactive, and it's like, oh, we're running out of time, let's go quick, throw the camera on the shoulder, let's go. But I think, certainly as I'm maturing as a cinematographer, I'm trying to think a little bit more about, okay, how do we, what language does handheld provide, in terms of telling the story. And on Christine Keeler, for instance, the trial of Christine Keeler, to use its full title, we made quite, Andrea, the director, and I made a decision sort of very early on to say we would go handheld when we were with Christine and Mandy and we were in their world. And when we were with the sort of establishment, the governmental figures, we would be on rail and it would be much more conventional. And then as the two, to give each one a very precise energy. Because Christine, one of the big things was that she represented freedom of choice and all these other very sort of free and sort of liberal attitudes at a time where the establishment she was colliding with was actually incredibly rigid. They're coming out of the late 50s into the early 60s, the big kind of counterculture movement hadn't happened. You know, it was still very much that sort of, you know, Cold War mentality. And so we made that choice. But then as the two worlds did collide, depending on whose energy the scene was, and this is a bit more kind of integral, but it's like if you read a scene, you thought, okay, this is very much Christine's scene, we would go handheld. But if she was the one being put down and it was more the establishment scene, we would go conventional. And we sort of slowly started to blend these styles as the story was told through the course of the series.
Sure. On a show something like that, which is set in the 1960s or a period, how do you go about lighting that? Do you give it, how much consideration do you give due to the time period?
Quite a lot, actually. I mean, on well, say ABC, I mean, now I'm going away from Christine, but on ABC Murders, we lit the whole thing with tungsten lighting, and we used particularly these lamps called open face lights. So they're not lensed. So they produce a very hard, warm light that gives you a very clean shadow. And because we were looking at what some of the influences we had on that was sort of the photos of people like Bill Brandt and stuff like that, were very, very contrasty, hard shadowed photos. And we were very much looking at, Alex and I were very much looking at the noir sensibilities. We just thought that would be a nice sort of feel to it. And the tungsten lighting is more akin to the kind of lighting that was around in that era, and it just worked for it. So, so absolutely, the period has a huge sway over the way we do light. You know, the way I would design lighting for.
Just for people who don't understand quite, you mentioned tungsten lighting.
Yeah, sorry.
What exactly? But for people who don't understand what that is exactly, what is that?
So Charlie means him.
By people, I mean me.
I mean, I'm going to make sure I don't mess it up now. So effectively, you know, with a tungsten filament bulb is the sort of, I don't have one.
It's like in an inventor's laboratory, isn't it?
Yes.
Like a really clearly how you imagine it in a sort of old universal.
Yeah, you know, it's an
film.
old filament bulb that effectively produces light through heat and has that very warm
yellow
light. I'm not doing it as service here because, you know, you definitely need to speak to a sort of a gaffer who could be more clear about what it is. But it's balanced to, the main difference is it's balanced to a color temperature of 3,200 generally, which is a warm color temperature. It's what you would have on, you know, household bulbs, you know, that kind of deal. Old school household bulbs particularly, the new ones tend to be energy efficient. We also have something called Hdmi lighting, which is balanced to 5,600 kelvins. That's the unit used for sort of measuring light, the color of light.
So
that's
when they say like sorry to interrupt, like a 5K, is that what that means?
No, so that's,
lights.
Yeah, confusingly, that is the output of power. So when it says 5, that means it puts out 5 kilowatts of light.
Kilowatts, okay, right. Okay.
That's the power, whereas kelvins is the color temperature. And so, you know, the HMIs that get used are daylight balance. So usually you would use them if you were, say, if I was in this room and this was a studio or even a house, you know, that 18K, there's not an 18K, it's the sun behind me, but, you know, you would put an 18K light, which is like a daylight, which is a daylight balanced light, big source that can replicate the sun quite, you know, easily outside the window and push it through the window, and that would effectively light your room as if it was daylight. Sure.
Do you find yourself, I'm shooting a short film next year, so when I see some light, I saw a tungsten bulb the other day and I go running over and taking a picture of it. Yeah. I'm like, what am I doing? But I've got an album on my phone now of like lights that I like. Do you ever find yourself doing that, or have you got your lighting set up now ready?
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, completely the journey that I've sort of personally made working in drama is to become much more immersed and in love with the lighting side of it. You know, that because never really having the sort of the amount of kit to play with and having the sort of the time to actually create a scene through light in documentaries, I never had that pleasure. You know, it was always just about composition. But now, of course, for me, it's like, although what I do is I operate on all my stuff anyway, because I still love the side of the operating. I like to be on the camera and composition and stuff. It's very important for me. But the bigger joy now is lighting, you know, and getting nerding out about lighting, you know, and also lighting technology is moving very fast at the moment. I mean, my kind of slight, as somebody who loves tungsten lighting and lighting with tungsten lighting, big tungsten lighting, because it's an older approach, it's a more old school approach, but they're energy wise, they're incredibly inefficient and wasteful. I mean, you're losing a colossal amount of energy just through heat alone, you know, before the light even hits where you need it to hit. So, you know, there is a big move at the moment, obviously, in all the technologies and LEDs, and creating LED lights that will do something similar to the sort of more old school incandescent film lighting. And with that comes a level of control that we've never had before, you know, where you can have everything on an iPad and you've got your entire lighting in a room or a house or a studio on an iPad, and you have full control over where you take those LEDs in terms of color temperature and intensity and all these other things that in the past would have required 3 guys clipping gel onto a lamp to change its color, or putting what they call scrims in, which are these metal, like basically metal mesh filters, which will just start to reduce the amount of light coming out, or not enhance it, take them out to enhance it. But, you know, so there's a lot of evolution going on in lighting. So it's an exciting, if that's the sort of thing that floats your boat, is an exciting time.
Sure, and you spoke just briefly about you like to operate the equipment still, because some cinematographers have a camera operator, don't they?
Yeah.
What is that just down to the DOP, whether they want to operate or whether they've got a team of people? How do you, obviously you really enjoy operating, so how does that influence?
Well, I mean,
the decision?
I think it's a useful selling point for me, just because it's a slightly cheaper for the production. But I, you know, again, not to bang the same drum, but I do think, you know, the documentary past is something to do with that. It's just the sort of the need to be a hands on the camera, and, you know, and not that I'm in any, you know, I'm leagues and leagues and leagues below this particular individual, but Roger Deakins, for instance, he came from documentaries, and he does largely still operate on most of his work, and always has, you know, always enjoys doing that, you know, and I, you know, there are a number of cinematographers at the very top of the game who still like that, but then there are others who don't, and they just never have been that way. I think on the bigger productions, you can get away with not having to operate. When I did Dark Materials, they actually were kind of trying to steer me away from operating. They said, you just may not want to be on a camera. You know, there's a lot going on. These are huge scenes, a lot of lighting involved, because they're all big studio sets. And they were saying, actually, you know, we'll give you an operator for a camera so you can step away. And I ended up cherry picking some days where I wanted an operator, because, you know, we had a lot of lighting to do. But very quickly, actually, both the director and I, Leanne, the director, and I, we wanted me on the camera, you know, and I was happy to get back on the camera. So I think it is personal choice, of course, but for me, it's a big part of what I do, and it's you're put at the coal face, you know. I think if you're not operating, you're not on set, you're not right there where it's all happening, and you can be a bit removed. And I think if you're on the camera, you're right there. You're the first point of contact the actors have, which I think is important, because that's a very important working relationship. I can see better in a way what the lighting's doing, you know, and I can also react a little bit more, you know, to what's going on, which sometimes that's harder to communicate to an operator, you know.
So you've just mentioned something there, but you interact with the actors as well as the director would.
Yeah, I mean, in very different ways. You know, it's not my place to sort of comment on performance or script or anything else like that. But you will find a lot of actors, particularly experienced actors. You know, I've just finished working with Jared Harris, you know, who's a very experienced actor, and they are very aware of where the camera is. They want to know where the camera is. Some of them even want to know. On an ABC, John Malkovich was a classic. You know, he'll want to know what lens. You know, I mean, he's very involved. You know, but and all of that they want to see, and they want, you know, and that experience. It's all part of will help them with their performance. And so I think you know, I have that level of interaction with the actors, you know, a lot of them. And also I just think I really enjoy the company of actors on set. It's something that for me, I would absolutely shrivel up and die having to perform in front of a camera, so I'm a bit in awe of them anyway, but I enjoy that relationship because it's, and having that kind of friendship with them, because if they then trust who's on the camera, they relax. And, I think it's an incredibly difficult job to act, to come in and inhabit a role and be there. And we're reliant on them convincing the audience that they are that person to be able to tell the story, in a convincing way, so they're all very much an important cog, like we all are in a big machine. And I think if they trust the person on the camera and there's a good atmosphere and a good rapport there, then things inevitably go smoother.
So when you say, like with John Malkovich on the ABC Murders, when he says what kind of lens, so if you were to say, I'm on a 35, you would say he would just adjust his performance to fit the frame, would you say? Yeah,
I think it's important to communicate to the actors what lens you are on and what the shot is. It does help them adjust their performance, because if they've got, not that John had a huge amount of like big emotive scenes in that,
of course, yeah,
in that particular series, but the many actors did, and in a lot of the other stuff I've done, many actors have had some very sort of very, very emotional scenes which are exhausting. So if they know that I'm on a 21 mil and I'm sort of half a mile away, then they're not going to give it their all. But if I'm telling them, listen, I'm 75 and I'm in here, then they're going to be, okay, this is my shot. This is the one where the audience are going to read out absolutely everything that's going through this character's head. So I think it's just a nice thing to do with them. And I've worked with Sean Bean now a couple of times, and he always really appreciated that, to sort of know when he could not take his foot off the gas, but you know what I mean? Just be able to kind of go, okay, I can just peg this back a little bit, save myself for the close-up.
Of course, yeah. And just talking about the ABC Murders, because we rewatched it recently just before the podcast. And what did you film that on? What kind of camera did you film that on?
That was an Alexa Studio. So the Arri Alexa Studio, which is an interesting camera actually, because for those who may have heard it or not heard of it, the Arri Alexa is like the sort of game-changing digital Super 35mm camera that Arriflex, a very old camera manufacturer, released. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe something like that. Anyway, and it was the big kind of game changer. It was the one that suddenly everybody go, right, here it is. Here is the digital camera that we all love, and simple, very German, very simple, well built, good engineering, and it had just a lovely look about it. But it's a digital camera, so you're capturing images onto a sensor. What the Alexa Studio did is they put the old in film cameras there was a spinning mirror. And it was almost like a sort of half moon. It was a mirror, and then there was a gap in the mirror of whatever size that was your shutter angle. And that gap allowed light onto the film plane. That's how you expose the light. And depending on how much of a shutter angle, how fast that mirror was spinning, affected, slow motion and how much clarity you get in the image, and so on and so forth. The studio had that mirror in it, even though it was a digital camera. So you still had a spinning mirror, and you were capturing a digital image through it, which gave it a slight softness, and it kind of gave it that slight sort of filmic little sort of tick and softness that is very imperceptible, and people don't even notice it, but I could, and it was a really nice look, and it was part of our leanings to sort of help tell the story of the period, was to use that camera.
And so, is that shot 24 frames a second still? Obviously, depending on what the
25 in the UK, 24 if it's a US release.
Why is that difference? Obviously, it's only one frame.
I think it's the difference between the scan rates, and again, this may be wrong, between the PAL and NTSC television. So we're PAL in this country.
Okay, yeah.
Don't ask me what that stands for, and it's NTSC in the US, and NTSC was always scanned at whatever, that's 69 or whatever it is, that kind of the 24 fitted into, and for us we're always at 50, so 50
right.
high.
Sure. And do you get to choose personally what camera you're going to use?
That is part and parcel of my sort of choice. So there are a few factors that you have to take into account. So each broadcaster, so whoever you're making the show for, will have some technical requirements that you have to adhere to. So if, for instance, if you're doing a show for someone like Netflix, they insist on it being shot at 4K. They just want to sort of future-proof their productions like that. So that does limit the cameras. You can obviously then only use a 4K camera, but
Yeah.
ABC was, terrestrial for ITV, so they didn't have those stipulations. So I could shoot, I could pretty much choose the camera I wanted to, within reason, obviously. I mean, there's still have to sort of adhere to a certain budget, but
Sure.
certainly choosing a camera and choosing lenses are the sort of a very important part of like the prep process as well.
So when something like Born to Kill, which was that Channel 4?
Yeah.
Channel 4. So how would that differ from, say, BBC or ITV? Or does it literally depend on the tone of the show and what time it will be on? Because obviously that's more an adult show.
Yeah, I think you're going to get, just the simple fact that channel is commissioning the show, they'll only commission certain shows, that they feel are within the Channel 4 brand. So Born to Kill, Channel 4 with Born to Kill. Born to Kill is the sort of story that was told that would probably only be told on Channel 4, because they like that slight sort of quirk, and pushing the envelope a little bit. There's not many channels that will tell a story of a teenage serial killer. So
they're all running to it now, ready to.
Exactly. Channel 4 are very happy, and that's the sort of story they embrace. Whereas a story about Poirot is perfect ITV fodder, So it's that's what I mean. You normally know beforehand, whoever's commissioned it, they all have their sort of needs and what the kind of stories that they know their audience is like. If people go to Channel 4, they know what they're going to get. They go to BBC One, but equally they know what they want and are going to get. So
casting John Malkovich in the ABC murders, did that change the production value of the show very much?
I think it was kind of genius, actually. It was a bit of a really interesting piece of casting, and he loved it. I mean, he's a thoroughly interesting individual, amazing to work with. And obviously for me, when you look at the list of DOPs he's worked with, it's just like, it's pretty intimidating. So it was, he's very forthright, John, and he loved telling me, what I was doing, when I was doing it right, when I was doing it wrong.
So do you find yourself able to learn from actors?
Yeah, definitely.
Obviously, because they're not DOPs, you know more about it, but they have worked on, or someone like John Malkovich has worked with, great DOPs in the past. Not saying that you have, obviously, but from what you're saying, they are able to tell you, look, if you did that instead, or have you tried doing that? Suddenly, you find yourself expanding your toolkit, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it was interesting with John. I mean, I've not worked with an actor who will go, have you tried this technique? I guess there are a number of, I've definitely worked with some female actors who are definitely very aware of what light suits them best and what they like to see. And that, that's a really interesting learning curve. The first show I ever worked on was a series called Home Fires. It had 8 leading female part roles in it. With an age range from sort of 20 through to, I think Francesca was like 70 something. And so you're lighting scenes for, 8 or, 8 plus actors in a room, all of whom will require slightly different approaches. And I think sort of really respecting your cast and their experience and their sort of knowledge. Like Francesca Annis, who was in Cleopatra, for God's sake. I mean, she's just been, she's like incredible. She was very aware of like where the camera was, where the light was, and would sometimes just look at me if I wasn't doing something, think, where's that little bit of fill light that I quite like, or something like that. So you learn all these things, and there's definitely things, that sort of learning to respect the cast and 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 listening to them, I think, is a hugely important part. Sometimes there's a little bit of a pushback if you feel like somebody wants a bit more light, but it's not right for the scene or the space. Then you have that conversation. It's all very suitable. But I mean, John was never like, he never sort of said, "But you should do this." He was always just good at pointing out things. There's one instance where we're in the cornfield. If you remember, right at the very end when the church is on fire and he's in the cornfield.
Spoiler alert, folks.
Yeah. Sorry.
All those lovely Germans.
Yeah, exactly. Thankfully, it's not it's not like the denouement of the entire film, but
Sure.
it's at this moment. And but he was the fire itself actually is a complete visual effect, but he was in this field, and it was an emotional scene for him coming round and all this happening, and it was a flashback to his earlier time in Belgium and all this. And all I could see, I was filming him, I was very low, he was right in front of me, and I had sort of one eye in the viewfinder, and one eye, suddenly I looked up because I could see one of our special effects guys moving in with a smoke machine who was creating smoke in the background, and he was getting closer and closer to walking through the back of shot. And I was thinking, oh, somebody needs to tell him. And I was trying to kind of make eye contact with him and facial expressions to say, you need to sort of back off because you're about to walk into shot. And then I was doing all this, not realizing, of course, my face was twitching away, trying to sort of one half of my face was twitching away, trying to sort of flag to this guy that what he was doing. And afterwards, John turned to me and goes, Joel, you need to be aware of, like, if your face goes into spasm and I'm trying to act, it's quite distracting. I was like, oh, yeah, sorry, John. But you know what? It was a really important lesson, humbled by the great John Malkovich. But he did it in a very gentle and very nice way. And it was quite late in the shoot, and we'd become, we were getting on very well at this point. So it was all in good humour. But it was a serious point. And from that moment on, I've always been very aware of the fact that I am on a camera. There is literally 2 feet away from me somebody who's trying to do a job of acting, which in itself requires a lot of internalizing. And the last thing they need to look up and see, somebody sort of having facial spasms, off camera, and just to be more aware of how I move around camera and how much of a distraction that can be.
Yeah.
So it was a great lesson.
How did a 3-episode show like a mini series like that? How long did that take to shoot? And that was all UK based, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was all UK based. We shot it all up in Yorkshire, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, even the stuff down at Bexhill and things like that.
Well, actually, no, you're right. And Bexhill was the only location we had to go to.
Oh, because you used that kind of Art Deco-y style building, wasn't it?
And that was in the book. So that pavilion is in the book. So they were very keen, the Agatha Christie estate, who have the sort of power of veto over any Agatha Christie production, regardless of who it is, Kenneth Branagh or us. Then, they ultimately will sort of they exec all the Agatha Christie productions, and they were saying that's the one building you have to use because that's where she wrote the book.
Oh, right.
And she sort of it's in the book, it's in the story. So that was our one little venture out. But everything else was up in wonderful Yorkshire during that incredibly hot summer when the World Cup was on.
Wow.
And remember when everyone went out and socialised?
Yeah.
I made a joke, another podcast, that summer was really hot, and they completely ripped me apart for it. But it was really hot, wasn't it?
Really hot. Yeah, it was really hot. And I remember because we were filming it for winter, and all the actors had full 3-piece suits and greatcoats on. It's like, oh, you poor guys.
Yeah, I bet. Because there's a lot of railways up there, aren't there, that look quite authentic to that time.
Yeah, and that's really what that's what steered the production there. Really, there were 2 places they could go. There was one down here in the West Country, and one was Yorkshire, where they still had steam trains, on the lines, that we could then get onto and use. They made a big song and dance about all the railway stuff. I think we actually only were in the trains for about 2 days,
Right.
and everything else was elsewhere. It did seem a bit of an odd steer, but it was wonderful nonetheless. And Leeds is a great city for playing kind of 1930s, London.
Yeah. The aerial shots of the railways, was that done with the drone?
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you use the same camera for that?
No, well, it depends on the drone. I mean, there are some colossal drones out there now that will lift full-size film cameras. And I don't mean film as in 35mm. I mean sort of, the film cameras we use. But again, it's sort of conditions and costing as well, of course. So if the conditions are quite volatile, then a lot of drone operators won't want to put a very large, expensive drone up in the air with a very large, expensive camera on it, because obviously if things go wrong, it comes down with quite a sort of speed and weight behind it, and could cause some really sort of serious damage or injury. So
Harry's aren't cheap, are they?
no, not exactly. So they tend to put smaller drones up with their own little cameras on. And all the stuff in ABC, the train stuff in ABC, is a combination of some drone work with actual trains, and then a lot of plate work, which means where you just go and you shoot the countryside, that you want to put the railway line and the train in, or sometimes it's a railway line through countryside, and then the trains are actually digital.
Oh, okay, right, yeah, that makes sense as well. Especially at the time period, obviously there'll be some train nuts out there who go, "Oh, this is wrong," and you have to get it accurate.
Yeah, I'm sure there's still that.
Yeah, there probably is. There probably is. I appreciate the time's going on, but very briefly, do you have you ever shot on film, or is that something you'd like to do?
Well,
I was actually going to ask.
I did. I mean, weirdly, the document, back in the documentary days, it was all on Super 16. So I was there at that transition when we moved from Super 16 into beta, as it was then, and then quickly into high definition. So it, I sort of was very much in the sort of transitional stage of that from the beginning to the end. Never shot a drama on film, never shot a film on film. I have to sort of hold my hands up and say I'm a digital cinematographer. There's no, that I can't sort of masquerade to say I'm a film cinematographer. I've shot films on film, but I've really grown as a DP, in the digital world. And yes, if the time and the money and the project was right and film seemed to be the most obvious choice, I would love to do that. I think if you're out on the road doing, say capturing very natural environments, nothing will beat film. I mean, I think film is still hands out above and beyond a better format for things like that. I mean, my personal experiences, I don't think digital sensors like green very much. Okay. I always have a real kind of bugbear. I get into a grade and I look at grass and I just think, oh, it looks awful. It just looks almost neon. Whereas film emulsions, like lovely emulsions, like the Fuji emulsions, were always beautiful, for capturing, that green, weirdly, the cyan end of a color range. But so I think if the project was right, but as long as I'm in this world, I don't really see why anybody's going to make that choice, because it's just, why would you? I mean, I can't imagine all the new sort of commissioners of TV drama will go, go and shoot it on film. We don't mind, we don't mind you spending that kind of money and time. It's too much of a gamble. It's too much of a risk.
But that's why you have that, if I understood correctly from what you were saying earlier, with the Alexa to emulate that kind of feeling of using film.
I mean, that particular Alexa, that is an older Alexa now, which, we were lucky because it was sat on the shelf at Panavision in Manchester. But it's but I think the new camera I tend to use a lot now is the Sony Venice, and it's an updated sensor with the latest compression algorithms in it and various other things that I don't know about. But it does spit out a beautiful image and a very manipulable image. So when I get into the grade, which is where you take the finished production and you work with somebody called a colorist, where you can manipulate the way the color palette, the tonal range, the contrast, and various other things to create a look, a look of the show. That particular camera provides us with a very lovely raw template to be able to do that work with, more so, I'd say, than the Alexa. And then I think if you're still after a filmic look, I think you can capture that. You can create that a little bit in the grade. You can also capture it with the choice of glass that you use, in other words, the lenses that you use, and any filters you may put on top of that. And, they're just these little incremental decisions you make along the way to create the look that you ultimately want to for the show. And I think most of us are always trying to sort of create a sort of more filmic feel in all that we do.
Is that done also through the aspect ratio that you use?
Yeah, I mean,
And do you decide that, or is that done in editing, or do you shoot in that aspect ratio?
That ultimately becomes a channel decision.
Okay.
So, the standard format that we're all used to now is 16:9. More and more, particularly on the sort of pay-per-view sort of style channels, they're embracing 2:1, which is a slightly more cinematic look. It's sort of a wider feel to the frame, which automatically is cinema. Obviously, the true cinema is sort of wide, the lovely old wide screen.
But the 2:1, didn't they use that on Apocalypse Now? The cinematographer came up.
Yeah, they may well have. Yeah, exactly. I can't remember exactly what the old film format what it equates to, but it's
because it was 2:35:1, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, Dark Materials we shot 2:1 on, and I think
Okay.
it really works. The second season, the one that's on at the moment, we shot 2:1 on, and I did a thing called Come Home.
Yeah, I had a friend who was in that. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah, so that was 2:35:1. We shot that anamorphically using anamorphic lenses. Handheld. That was tough. The heavy lenses, but that was, and so that was ITV. For some reason, they allowed. No, wasn't maybe BBC actually. They allowed us to sort of shoot 2:35. More often than not, weirdly, the thing that really dictates the aspect ratio, whether you can use these wider aspect ratios, is international sales.
Oh, really? So if it goes to America or something like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, US isn't so bad, but there are quite a few territories around the world who don't accept anything other than 16:9. So you just have to, if a company is looking for international sales as a big part of their revenue stream, then sometimes you are, beholden to a 16:9 frame. Otherwise they've got quite an expensive process of resizing, in post. So they're either willing to do that, which I think His Dark Materials were, or then they're not, and they actually The Beast Must Die. Dominic, the director, and I both wanted 2:1, but they said no because of the sales.
Sure.
And so that's a decision that's made before you come on, is it?
Yeah, I mean, well, no, it's the inevitable question you ask in prep is, most with DPs will go, can I shoot this a different format? Because we all want it to sort of look as cinematic as possible, and they'll either go, yeah, absolutely, or no way, we've got we've got it all set in stone and it's there, and this is what the channel wants. So I think the next thing I'm doing is for Amazon, and I believe it's 16:9 as well. Because they just want to be able to get it all over the world. So.
And when you shoot with anamorphic, for those who don't know anamorphic, that's like when the lens squashes everything into, you can get a wider view into a.
Yeah, it's an optically sort of odd process, but effectively the very old sort of film cameras had a 4:3 sensor, which is almost square. And what the anamorphic lens does is it's able to it shoots on the sort of wide aspect, inverts it, and puts it onto a square sensor, because that's the way you can get the widest amount of information onto a square sensor.
Right.
So it's I believe I got that right. I'm sure there's some purists out there who tell me I'm slightly wrong, but that's
we have some people out there.
Well, they can come on next time.
Exactly, but that's effectively the process. So you shoot on a 4:3 sensor when you're shooting anamorphic, and the lens is the thing that does the capture into the and does the squashing for you. So the resizing, as it were. So an anamorphic is 2:3:5:1. So
that's right. Yeah,
it's the original. It's probably the sort of cinematic format. I think if I was to shoot anything that was going to be projected in the cinema theaters, I would always go 2:3:5:1. I think it's the true cinema format. I mean,
yeah, that's right.
It's useful on TV. I don't think it really has a place on TV, to be honest. I think 2:1 is a much better wide format for TV. I think,
and it gives it a cinematic look still, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think Stranger Things, I think they shot that in 2:1 as well.
Exactly. A lot of Netflix work is now 2:1. I think it's a really nice format for TV. Whereas 2:3:5:1 is it's the cinema. It's the cinema format. It's beautiful.
I know on things like Jurassic Park, they shot in 1:8:5 because of the dinosaurs are obviously really tall, so they wanted to, in order to get that, rather than having the widescreen 2:3:5.
Yeah.
they extended that in order so they could do that. So obviously it does depend on the storyline as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Comes into it.
and directors like Andrea Arnold, like she likes to shoot 4:3,
Mhm.
so it's it still gets used. And Bait, I think, was 4:3, wasn't it?
Right. Oh, is that the one down the
Cool,
by the
yeah.
fisherman's? Yeah, that was really
Yeah.
good. I saw that. The
Okay, yeah.
BFI did a showing of it. If anyone's out there listening who wishes to sort of get into cinematography or something they're aspiring to make a career in, what advice would you give them? I mean, it's a very broad question, but if anything that you know now that you would wished you'd known back when you started. Everything.
If you just coalesce that into like 20 words.
Snappy, pithy answer. Yeah. I mean, be patient. I think it's the main thing. Is just, and do not underestimate the lessons that you are learning every day when you're working in wherever you're working. I think if you come from, in all fairness, anybody can be a cinematographer, but obviously it does take time. You're not going to just sort of be able to jump straight into the hot seat, and nor should you want to, because, there's an awful lot to kind of take on board and learn. And, I've only been shooting drama now for probably 6-7 years. Maximum, maybe even less than that, but it's like and I wanted to shoot drama for probably the last sort of 20 years, but it was just a process that happened, and I'm really, really grateful for having had all that learning time before sort of before being given the opportunity. And I think if you want to if you're working in some sort of visual medium already, that's really important. I think if you're taking photographs, if you have a passion for visual media, then you're halfway there, because you are thinking about things like light and composition, and these are sort of the tools of the DP. And then just keep shooting, keep plugging away, and be as patient with yourself as possible, because every experience you have behind a camera, you'll learn something new. I still learn something new. I still suffer from two things. I still have terrible imposter syndrome wherever I turn up on a job. And then I always come away from a job having learned a number of really, really vital lessons that will just inform me for the next thing and the next thing and the thing after that. And that is it. It's just like, you never know everything.
Mm-hmm.
You're always learning, you're always evolving, and that's why it's such a wonderful craft.
I'm aware that time is coming to an end, but we usually have a question we like to finish off the podcast with. It usually is there a film that you are ashamed you haven't seen? But as we haven't really talked about films so much this podcast, I want to kind of change it and say, as a cinematographer, is there a film that is, in your eyes, perfect? Like, everybody needs to see this film from a cinematography point of view?
Or just a few, if you've got any on top of your mind.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of films I think are fantastic and have influenced me in very sort of odd ways. But I think if I was to pick a film that is absolutely perfect and that you could pause it at any moment and it's a beautiful image, would be No Country for Old Men.
Fantastic.
Roger Deakins.
Yes. Yeah. See, I still think that's his best film. I still think it's the Coen brothers' best film, and I love the Coen brothers, and that's a contentious thing to say, I know, but honestly, that film, you can pause it at any moment, and it's the most stunning image. And maybe it's because it's sort of West Texas, and it always looks fantastic there, but it is. I think that's a stunning film. But then, and I often reference it quite a lot. I'll drag images out of that, for points of reference. But then there are also sort of many, Raiders of the Lost Ark, not the most obvious choice, to make, but there's the lighting that Douglas Slocum did in that is absolutely fantastic, and I mined that film so often for sort of looks and little homages to it. I mean, it's beautifully lit, and I think that gets a bit lost because it's Indiana Jones and it's sort of action adventure and everybody just gets caught up in the story, but the lighting is absolutely beautiful in that film.
There's a scene that sticks out where he runs when I think he's chasing the basket, and he runs from quite a distance and he stops and it's right on his eyes and it's just in focus, and I was
yes
amazing. How many times did they practice that? It's so good.
And I think that was the scene where he didn't. I think he was really sick.
Yeah, they'd all had
Really ill, wasn't he?
Yeah, in North Africa, I think they were.
Yeah.
And I think apart from Steven Spielberg, had only just had tinned food or something, and
Yeah.
they were literally like, it was just running through them. And that's how the shooting scene came
Yeah,
about.
that's it.
It's like, should we do this elaborate fight? And he was like, I'm not doing that. Can I just shoot him? And he's like, yeah. And if there was a film you haven't seen that you're ashamed to say, if you're not too ashamed to say it now.
Temple of Doom. Have you not seen that? After such a
gosh, I've seen a lot of films, but to think of one I should have seen and haven't seen. Wow, I don't know. I don't actually. I don't know the answer to that question, weirdly. I'd have to think about that.
Okay. I'd usually say that's a good answer. That usually means that you've seen everything you feel you should have watched. Because I know.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be obviously something out there really pivotal that I've sort of never seen. I think I've only seen one of the sort of Three Colors trilogy, which is, always held up when you're at film school as, as this sort of ultimate, perfection in cinema. But as a body of work, I haven't seen an awful lot of Hitchcock.
Really?
That is definitely an area that I'm lacking in. I was listening to a review of Ben Wheatley's Rebecca earlier. I think I've definitely not seen the original, Hitchcock's Rebecca. I'm not like ashamed of that, but I know,
of course,
know
that's one that you thought, yeah,
it's definitely a sort of dearth in my film knowledge.
Do you still watch a lot of films, even though you're working incredible amounts? Do you still get time?
Yeah, weirdly, I think I watch more films than I do television. I work in TV drama. I watch films, and I think I always reference films, and they're always films and photography. Actually, are my 2 points of reference, and always have been.
Is that because you find films slightly easier? You mentioned kind of data mining them earlier and going through the scenes.
Yeah.
Do you find that easier with films than TV?
I mean, I think that on the whole, and maybe that is slightly changing now, but films still have, and I know this isn't the case, having shot a few, that you can be up against it as much as anything. But I think what's nice about films is films give you a greater ability and flexibility to be able to tell us the story of a scene, say, in a single shot. So because of that, you're able to compose very beautiful frames. So as visual references, if you're putting together, before a lot of projects, I'll put together mood boards, which will be an amalgamation of photographs and stills from films that will tell, different looks and moods that I want to sort of explore, when making a production. And that I often do those for interviews, actually, to get jobs. I'll be sent a script, put together a series of mood boards, and take those to the interview. Go, right, this is what I'm thinking, and if it resonates, well, you get the job. If it doesn't, you don't hear from them. But it's and I think films are just they are not, as a format, it's easier to obviously sort of pull images from films, because I think they've just had slightly more time put into it, and they're able to tell a story with less edits, whereas in TV we're always a little bit beholden to the need to go in for the close up or whatever it might be. There's always that kind of nervousness.
And you might have like 50 episodes to choose from, whereas with a film it's a 2-hour block. So you say, if you just follow Raiders of the Lost Ark rather than episode 12 of season 2 or whatever it is.
Well, there we go. I mean, it's also just through sheer sort of sanity. You don't want to be trawling through endless hours of TV. Not that because obviously there are some absolutely stunning bits of work out there.
Cool. Well, Joel, thank you so much for joining us. It's been incredibly interesting. I could have talked to you loads of geek questions that everyone else would have tuned out on. But it's
like we were joking earlier about him holding up the light bulb and all that. But genuinely, when we meet up, he'll show me pictures. He will show me. He's got these apps of just all these different.
I've got an app where it shows you what lens on what camera. When you're out, I'm like, oh, this might be quite good. Will it look good on this? So
I'll be sitting there going, yeah.
It's a healthy obsession. I fully admire it and encourage.
It's like visiting time. I'm in this prison where no one else cares. And,
but no, genuinely brilliant. Thank you so much for talking to us, Joel.
My pleasure.
Joel, thank you very
Anytime.
much, and good luck on your next project.
Thanks.
Thank
Really.
you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.